Oh, are we live? What happened there? We're getting a weird error here. Oh, we're live. We're on. We're going. Hello. What a great start. Off to a great start. How's it going, everybody? Jesse Montano here, Guerrilla Sports Off Ice. We are kicking off the week here, breaking down trade deadline. But, of course, you guys know I want to remind you about our great friends over at Trusted American Mortgage. Trusted Americans, salary-based mortgage consultants want to help you lower your interest rate and get a better monthly payment. Go to trustedamerican.com right now to see how much money they can help you save right now today. Hello and welcome in.
Please do not leave your luggage unattended on the station.
Welcome to the show. Hello, welcome in Guerrilla Sports Off Ice. Crazy day. Twitter's going in and out. Hockey is back roaring after a busy, crazy weekend, Megan. Geez. Twitter not working. Don't know if any of you folks can see us over on Twitter. I'm Jesse Montano. She's Meghan Angley. Chloe Thiel behind the glass today. Megan, we've got a jam-packed show. We are going to be auditing essentially the entire NHL. Who did what? Who were, and it's always hard to say who are winners and losers. Time is going to bear all that out. But what teams did we liked, what we weren't expecting, maybe things what we saw coming, didn't happen, whatever. How you doing today? Beautiful day out again today.
Yeah, I wore open-toed shoes. It's really gorgeous outside, and it looks like it'll stay gorgeous at least through the week. And Erik Johnson is making his return.
His re-debut.
To Ball Arena. Yes, his re-debut. So that feels a little special in the air. On my way to the rink this morning, Heat Waves came on my playlist completely by happenstance. So it felt really perfect.
Very, very fitting. I never know how to describe that kind of stuff. The re-debut, it's not without some controversy with Erik Johnson coming back into the lineup tonight as the player that's coming out. Sam Malinski and Jared Bednar said that he felt that Sam Malinski's last game with the Avs was his best so far in the NHL. We're going to get to the Avs near the end of this show, not only talk about what they did on the deadline, or at the deadline, but what they've got going tonight, trying to round out a 6-game homestand on a high note, playing against the Chicago Blackhawks. But Megan, we've got a lot to get into. Here's how we're going to break things up. We're going to talk about what happened in the East. We're going to talk about what happened in the West, and then we'll end things with what the Colorado Avalanche did, and just kind of how we see everything falling, how we're going to grade that out. Do want to let you guys know, as of about 5 minutes ago, Megan does have a full Avalanche trade grade and analysis piece that just hit guerrillasports.net. So make sure you guys go check that out after the show. For Megan's just, again, great and detailed breakdown of everything that happened. Always love reading your work, Megan. Another piece just hit the site. Do you have anything that you want to address just before we get into all of this trade deadline stuff? Like, I thought this was one of the more fun deadlines we had seen in a while.
Yeah, through an Avs lens, it certainly was, because I think other teams around the league, the Avs commanded a lot of attention this year in this deadline with how aggressive and bold this front office has been. And I think that's been interesting to be on the front lines of a team that is splashing in the headlines because they have been so bold. And it also has been filled with other, like the Mikko Rantanen trade was huge, but then the second Mikko Rantanen trade was huge, and then Brad Marchand getting moved was huge. And so outside of the Avs too, this has just been, in my opinion, one of the better deadlines I've seen in a while, because in the past it's felt like the biggest names on the trade block haven't really completely wowed you, and some of them have even moved ahead of the deadline. But for players like Marchand and Rantanen to be on the move this deadline, it was pretty huge. I mean, you can even just see in Brock Nelson the shock it was to him to be moved. just having been such an important part of the Islanders organization. So I don't necessarily revel in how disruptive that is for the players, but it's been an entertaining one.
Yeah. You know, and we're going to talk about the Mikko Rantanen trade when we get to both Carolina and Dallas and what it kind of means for those two teams. But even the drama that came with the Mikko Rantanen second trade, of it's happening. And then it seemed like maybe contract talks had broken down between Mikko Rantanen and Dallas Stars, and Elliot Friedman reporting after that the Stars got to one point where they essentially told the Hurricanes, enough of this. We're walking away. We're done. We're not going to waste our time. We're going to go get a player that we want elsewhere. And then Mikko Rantanen's camp comes back to it. The Toronto Maple Leafs reportedly offering Mitch Marner a 1-for-1 for Mikko Rantanen. Just a lot of drama that came with it. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. I think it was great to see the NHL have some fun. It feels like so often with the NHL, we see rumors and crazy things starting to swirl. And then nothing ends up happening. Everyone kind of stands pat and everyone kind of sits on their hands a little bit and, oh, well, no, we don't want to disrupt things and we don't want to upset the locker room. No, teams were going for it this year. And it was great. Someone calls out in the chat, you went 2 for 3 on your Avs trade board. Top targets for them to target. With Charlie Coyle and Brock Nelson. We will get into all of that. Megan, we're going to start out east. We're going to go alphabetical here in terms of how teams chose to shake out their deadline. I thought it was interesting. Only a couple of teams chose to stand pat completely. And it is just interesting, starting with this first team, to see how the league is shifting, and teams that have been buyers for years and years and years and years are suddenly sellers, starting with the Boston Bruins. You mentioned they traded Brad Marchand. They also trade Charlie Coyle. They also trade Brandon Carlo, and it was a futures heavy type return for them. They do bring in Henry Jokiharju from Toronto in the Brandon Carlo deal. They get Fraser Minton, as well as a first-round pick that is top 5 protected, and a 4th-round pick for Brad Marchand. It's a 2nd-round pick, but if he plays half the games for the Panthers through the first 2 rounds, it turns to a 1st-round pick. And then for Charlie Coyle, they do get Casey Middlestat, who picked up a point in his first game with the Bruins, as well as William Zellers and a 2025 2nd-round pick. The Bruins have officially waved the white flag on this era of their core. Like you said, Brad Marchand on the move. I do find the conditions interesting because that signals to me this injury might be a little bit more significant than we all thought.
I think that his availability is a big piece in evaluating this trade. I think the other interesting part is Marchand's comments about where things broke down with the Bruins front office. That feels a bit shocking on the heels of the contracts that they offered to Zadorov and Lindholm. It feels a little bit sour that they couldn't pay this legacy franchise player in Marchand. And understandably, he's getting a little bit older, but he's still a really effective
highly effective player, yes.
Obviously battling a little bit of something right now, but I just think that they overcommitted with some lesser players that can still help the Bruins. But when you look at the leadership aspect, right, like you've not only had the coaching turnover that the Bruins have had, but a player like Bergeron retires, and that leaves a hole in the leadership group with big shoes to fill. And Brad Marchand was a great leader to step into them. It's just a bit shocking how things unraveled. And then this is a team that's still competing in a wild card spot that has decided they're going to be sellers. And I find it really interesting that they dismantled the team so much too, moving on from Carlo, a player that was highly touted on their back end. I know he's similar to a Manson in that he's dealt with injury here and there, but such a vital defenseman for the Boston Bruins. And Coyle, I think, is the piece that you can kind of imagine, okay, I can understand why they move on from this player. It's certainly Colorado's gain, but the fit of Middlestat really surprises me that Boston had interest in being a trade partner in that respect. I want to see Middlestat thrive. I thought there were better homes for him around the league. And it'll be interesting to see then what he does in Boston, because the pressure mounted for Middlestat here in Colorado, and I think it shattered his confidence and he wasn't quite able to pick up the pieces here. that is a tough market to play in. Those Boston fans are diehards. And so the pressure doesn't get any easier. And now this team's in a little bit of a tight spot too, that he's wearing a lot of responsibility more than he was in Colorado. It's really interesting. I'm not quite sure I understand what the Boston Bruins are doing.
Well, and not only are Boston Bruin fans diehards, but there's an to your point about the style, not even system fix. I said this to someone the other day, and like, well, what's their system that he won't fit into? I said, I'm not necessarily talking about, their actual system of play, but stylistically, it's hard nosed, it's heavy. And yeah, I just don't know. That's the expectation of that fan base as well. So it's going to be interesting to see. I'm with you. I thought there were a couple teams around the league that he would have maybe fit a little bit better. But we'll see what they do with Casey Middlestat. We'll see how he fits there. Who knows? Maybe, we see that all the time. Players that we don't think will be a fit in a certain place end up thriving there because they're forced out of their comfort zone. But no, I'm with you. I that fan base is going to be all over Casey Middlestat. No doubt. Moving on, Buffalo Sabres. Sellers once again at the deadline. They do add a player in Josh Norris that I thought was an interesting add, but they are the ones who make that swap for Henry Jokiharju, sending him to the Bruins. They get a 4th-round pick back in 2026 for the 3rd time this season after being yelled at on Twitter that I had no idea what I was talking about how good Eric Brandstrom is. Traded for the 3rd time this season, this time for Nicholas Aube-Kubel, Colorado Avalanche 2022 Stanley Cup champion. Josh, and then in a separate trade, Josh Norris and Jacob Bernard Docker brought in. They send Dylan Cousins and Dennis Gilbert to the Ottawa Senators. I don't know if there's much to say about the Buffalo Sabres. They continue to be the Buffalo Sabres, just perennial sellers at the deadline.
Yeah, at least compared to some of the other teams we're going to look at, this seems like a team who has a better understanding of where they're at.
You think so, eh?
I do. I think that they are looking to build around young players to the best of their ability because they're also a little limited. They've had some of their players move on, like you look at Eichel, you look at a Casey Middlestat. It is interesting that I don't think anyone came out of the Middlestat-Byram trade feeling particularly happy with the end result. But going back to that trade, I didn't know that Buffalo was a great home for Byram either. Just based on
made sense.
Byram's own personal wants and ambitions and where he wanted to get to at the NHL level and just how stacked that right side of the back end is in Buffalo. It was always going to be a challenge for Byram to ascend past some of the other great defenders that are on that team to assume the top pair role that he wanted here in Colorado. And there was always the question of, is he ready for a top 4 role? Can he really carve out that path here in Colorado? Certainly it was more log jammed here with Taves and Makar, especially for the long run. But I think that's why there's maybe some dissatisfaction is it's mutual from Byram to just his role with the Sabres as well. And I think it's just, I want to see more from Buffalo moving forward, but I think they fared better than a lot of other teams around the deadline. It's still
at the deadline, you mean?
Yeah, I still feel like it's kind of a neutral impact, but they're getting great players in return. Josh Norris, I think, is a player that can help Buffalo, but they need to start winning some games.
With Byram.
Yeah, they need to start winning some games. I think the morale is probably still going to remain a concern.
Oh my God.
I know what you mean. I know what you mean. He won't play specifically, probably a top 5 unit on the ice with Byram, and that's a player that I think can help generate some offensive chances on the whole. But Bernard Docker probably. Somebody.
Yes, yeah. But Byram was the one guy that I was surprised that they didn't find a home for. Maybe, I'm with you. I thought that was such a weird deal from Buffalo's standpoint from the very beginning. It's like you have 2 number 1 overall picks already on your back end, and you just traded for this guy who wants to ascend beyond that. Like, I don't know. I always thought it was a weird fit for Byram in Buffalo. And Megan, the only thing I don't agree with you on is I think Buffalo, and that's an organization who has no idea what they are, where they're going, what they're even trying to do. I can't figure out year after year after year after year, they're in this same spot. And they make moves and you feel like, okay, they're bringing some guys in. they never really end up being what you want them to be. The amount of players who leave Buffalo and go on to have successful careers elsewhere is shocking. Now there's suddenly all this conversation with JJ Peterka not wanting to be there anymore. I think this is an organization who, I'm with you. I think they did all right at the deadline, but like, I think the Sabres need to seriously look, and I'm talking about from an ownership standpoint, tearing it all down. GM, coach, move on from most of the players that you have, reset completely. I mean, and just start over, because they're entering into that phase where they're not bad enough to be picking first overall, but they're nowhere near good enough to be even pushing for the playoffs. They're in trouble.
Yeah, no, I think I want to be clear that when I say they're compared to other teams have a better understanding of what they are, it's that they're a team that needs to be rebuilding.
Mm-hmm.
And so I at least think they approach the deadline as a team rebuilding. But I want to affirm what you're saying. This is a team 2 seasons ago was just points out of the wild card spot with Florida. And I thought that next year was going to be the year that they take a bigger stride forward.
Yep.
And they didn't. They took a huge step backwards, and they've stayed in that room ever since. And they've parted ways, with Okposo, their captain, last year. Obviously, Jeff Skinner no longer a part of that team. So it even, goes back, obviously, then Eichel, then Middlestat. But in recent times, it's continued to be pieces out, and they're not really replenishing with any marquee players. And so I thought JJ Peterka was going to end up a New York Ranger, and these teams were going to capitalize on the fact that they're not where either wants to be right now, because you're exactly right. They need to fully commit to the rebuild and get a little bit aggressive in what they're doing. And I think tearing it down is an interesting point. I don't want to just lazily point to coaching, because it's bigger than that, but it is, it's a retread coach in ways, and that just hasn't, it's bigger than that, but it's also a part of what needs to change in Buffalo, because it's kind of everything.
And that's my point. I don't think it's you can't point at any one thing, but when it's gone this bad for this long, and to your point, they're now taking steps backwards. It's like, you got to do something. Let's move on here.
Tage Thompson is way too
Thank
sick.
You for bringing that up. Right.
He's one of the best players in the league, but you wouldn't know it. He's buried and drowning in Buffalo. And I just want to see them get serious about supporting a really great talent in this league with more talent around him.
That's exactly the thing. We've already spent too much time on the Buffalo.
Sorry, I got excited.
No. But you're so right, because of all the names you just listed, when Casey Middlestat was there last year, he was their leading scorer. Jack Eichel, Jeff Skinner, Tage Thompson. You got Rasmus Dahlin on the back end. You got
huge defender. Owen Power's still there.
Owen Power, who is still, I think, has always been a little bit overrated, but still a very good defenseman. You got Bowen Byram on the back end. You got JJ Peterka there. I just keep listing names where it's like, how have you not accidentally molded this into a playoff team?
Right.
And in fact, you've gotten further from that goal. Yeah. All right, here's the big one, Megan. And we're going to have another opportunity to talk about this trade from the other side of it. Carolina Hurricanes. They do end up bringing in Mark Jankowski after all the stuff with Mikko Rantanen goes down. But their big deal was Mikko Rantanen being flipped from the Carolina Hurricanes to the Dallas Stars. They bring back Logan Stankoven, 2 first-round picks, and then 2 third-round picks. Look, I know that there's a lot of angles that you can take on this, that the Hurricanes did the best with the information they had available, everything that has come out about Mikko Rantanen and them kind of posturing, oh yeah, we'd be willing to play in Carolina, when they thought it was a bluff from the Avs. So, maybe a little bit unintentionally misleading for the Carolina Hurricanes. But look, Megan, no matter how you spin it, the Hurricanes walk away from this deadline with a little bit of egg on their face. And they end up, in terms of players that are actually going to impact their playoff run this year, their Stanley Cup hopes for 2025, they removed Marty Netchus and Jack Drury and ended up with Logan Stankoven when it's all said and done. This is a team that took a step back from where they were 2 months ago. And, I've seen people saying this team is no longer a contender. I tend to agree with that. I think we do have to reserve judgment on the trade as a whole to see what they do with those first round picks at this year's upcoming draft. They'll be able to make a big splash, but man, this was a tough 2 months for the Carolina Hurricanes.
Yeah, well, I mean, even going back to the last deadline, they found themselves in Jake Gensel territory in a bit of a different way. You know, they gave up bunting in a first that deadline just to lose Gensel and reclaim a third-round pick. And this felt like maybe an overreaction to wanting to be more aggressive at the deadline in the face of what had happened. And it benefited the Avs so much because the Avs were in a place of a bit of desperation. If it is true that JT Miller nixed a trade to Colorado, that was a target that they had their sights set on. And so with the no there, they had to get more aggressive then in moving on from Rantanen too. And I think that the pieces fell into place trying to compete with other teams that were making moves with other marquee pieces at the time. And it put a little bit of a timer of urgency on this trade. And the Avs come out clean, but I think that's where Carolina was back against the wall and maybe not doing full due diligence on their side of things in understanding where Mikko Rantanen's head might be at, despite the fact that Sebastian Aho and him were texting and in on it the whole time. That's why I do feel sincere sympathy for Carolina in this situation. I think a huge lesson has been learned. I can't classify them as anything close to a winner in this deadline. They survived it. They survived it. They're battered, they're bruised, they're bloody. They're going to be able to, with some of these picks, build a little bit in the future, but it hurt their window right now.
Yeah. And I mean, like, look, they're going to get into the playoffs. And I think if you punch a ticket to the dance, you've got an opportunity to win, especially this year in the NHL. I don't doubt that there is an alternate universe out there where, and who knows, maybe it ends up being this universe. I don't doubt there's a universe out there where this group of the Carolina Hurricanes embraces the fact that everyone thinks they blew it and that this team can't win and they go on some type of run. I don't think that's out of the question. They're a good team, but they were trying to build a great team and they just kind of fumbled it here. I think you saying they definitely did not win at this deadline, but they survived. I think that's a good way of putting it. Like you said, I feel for them in the sense that when they had those conversations with Mikko Rantanen's camp and when Sebastian Aho is texting one of his great friends, Mikko Rantanen, that, you know, I don't doubt that what Mikko was telling them was sincere, but I just think that he never really thought it was going to come to fruition. It was all just talk to try to get some leverage back.
Posturing.
Right.
Yep, he didn't think the Avs would genuinely pull the trigger.
And that's why he was as floored by it when it actually happened, because they thought that it was all just for show. Now here's my question to you. And then, you know, we don't have to spend a ton of time on this because I think we're going to want to spend more time on it when we get to the other side of the trade where Mikko Rantanen did end up. If you were the Carolina Hurricanes and you were running things there, would you have held on to Mikko Rantanen to try to just say, hey, we're going to take him as a rental and take our chances? Or do you think that you would have tried to do something similar to what they did where we got to recoup something here? Because the part that I do find interesting, and I heard an argument for it, I believe it was on 32 Thoughts last night, of, boy, couldn't you have just held on to him and hoped that he fell in love with the city and the team and all of that over the next 2 months? Or do you think, Megan, that there was an issue here with the style that Carolina liked to play, the fact that Mikko Rantanen lost so many minutes per night playing under Rod Brind'Amour versus what he was used to his whole career? Was this fit just not going to work, and would you have tried to move on?
Well, that's certainly a baiting question, Jesse.
Sorry.
No, it's okay, because I shook my head the minute you asked if I would have kept Rantanen as a rental, and the answer is a no. It's because of what anyone who's watched Rantanen can see about him is when he's disengaged and he's checked out, he's pretty checked out. And his hockey is made less effective as a result of that. And that's what I was seeing in Carolina, that this was a player who was never quite comfortable being there. And I can't speak for Rantanen personally, but I also know that you can kind of make up your mind about something. And when that seed is planted, it's a little hard to reverse it. And so if he's still processing the shock of the trade, I think he just associates negative value with Carolina as that landing spot. Like, this is not what I wanted. And so I just think that there was going to be a stink that stayed there for him in Carolina no matter what. And I think the opportunity and the playing style also didn't serve Mikko Rantanen in the best way, because it is a really aggressive structure that demands a lot of him. And there's so much of Mikko's game that can be papered over because he's so elite that there weren't really allowances for in Carolina. And then I think the lesser role, I put into quotes, it does impact a player like Mikko who's used to big minutes. On the opposite, it's why we're seeing Netches thrive in Colorado, because he is getting those minutes on a nightly basis. And so that runway exists in Colorado. It didn't exactly exist for Mikko in Carolina. I think this is a team too that needs to reevaluate how they deploy their stars in the first place, because I think that's how Netches became available to the Avs. I don't think he was even being utilized to the best of his ability, kind of being put in a third line role around the time that he gets traded. I don't think this would have worked out for Rantanen, even in the remaining months of hockey, because he wouldn't have been getting his best hockey. He would have been a little bit checked out, and you don't want a player who doesn't want to play on your team.
Yeah, I'm with you. I would have understood had they decided just to hold on to him to see, can we go win a cup? Then nobody cares. But I think you're right. I think they understood it wasn't going to work. I think they understood he wasn't going to stay there, and they didn't want to get caught with their pants down again like they did last year with Jake Gensel. But I think what you said there about they need to maybe look inward a bit and reevaluate how they are actually using some of these top players, because they are continuing to have a hard time keeping him there. Let's move on here. Columbus Blue Jackets. Look, this is one of the feel-good stories of the season. And they said, we aren't, we know we're overachieving. We know we're defying expectations here, so we're not going to get crazy. We'll bring in Luke Cunnin to help, show the team that we want to, we want to reward them. But hey, we're also not going to get crazy here. We know we're still a building team. I like that for the Blue Jackets.
Yeah, that's an easy one. Stamp of approval. I like keeping the group intact and throwing a vote of confidence behind that group and what they've accomplished this year, because it is really impressive.
Really impressive, and you don't have to get carried away. Yeah, I'm with you. Seal of approval for what the Blue Jackets did. Detroit Red Wings, another team, kind of kept it simple, knowing that they're on the bubble, but they don't want to get carried away. They bring Peter Mrazek back where he started his NHL career. They add Craig Smith to that deal as well, and they move out a player that I've always liked, but has never really quite gotten to the level that I maybe thought he would, Joe Veleno. Again, I think this is a team that's in a very similar boat to the Columbus Blue Jackets, trying to tweak. Give the players that are there, hey, good job, keep it going. Here's a vote of confidence.
Yeah, I'm mixed on Detroit. They still had about 10 mil in cap space to play with to do more around this team. I know for some people, Mrazek doesn't really move the needle. I actually think that he's leaving a struggling team, and his numbers probably regulate a little bit, but it's also not the solid goaltending that I think Detroit probably would like to count on. So I'm just kind of meh on what Detroit did. I think that they could have done a little bit more, but I go back to about 2 free agent off seasons ago, and they did a little too much. So maybe there is some of a cautionary tale that exists around this team. Like, we actually did way too much. The pieces didn't quite fully come together. Nashville wasn't paying attention to what Detroit went through about 2 seasons ago. I think they're paying for it now. So I understand approaching it with a little bit of caution, and it's just one of those teams I'll be keeping an eye on to see how they move this summer and then into next year.
They are 3 points out of a playoff spot, and the team they're chasing has a game in hand on them in the Ottawa Senators. Florida Panthers, this is another big one. Defending Stanley Cup champions. They do add Brad Marchand, which we talked about earlier. They also add Nico Sturm, which I really like that add at the bottom of the lineup. They move on from Spencer Knight in net, so they had to add Vitek Vanacek, also from the San Jose Sharks. And then in that deal where they moved on from Spencer Knight, a few days before the deadline, they add Seth Jones at 26% retained to make the money work. So really, you're adding in Seth Jones, Nico Sturm, Brad Marchand up front in front of the goalie, Vitek Vanacek on the back end. Look, I think this is a team that dealt with a little bit of a cup hangover, but that's a good couple bits of business right there.
No, this is a team that's really gunning for it again, and I am impressed by it. It's scary to think that anybody's path to the cup this year is probably going to have to run through Florida in a Stanley Cup final. It just feels that way. That's pretty aggressive on their behalf, and I think each of those players makes them better, down to Nico Sturm. So that's a playoff player that I think brings so much to the team day in, day out that people don't fully appreciate. That, outside of Jones and Marchand, who are obviously elite players, I think they're targeting a specific type of player that makes them better.
I agree. And you just think about a potential line of Matthew Tkachuk, Brad Marchand, and Sam Bennett, and it's like, oh my God, don't get me out there against those guys. I think it's going to be a really fun team, and I think Seth Jones is going to be able to slide. I think this is going to be the best hockey we see Seth Jones play.
Yes.
He's going to get to be perfectly cast in a role there.
That's a great point.
And hey, Spencer Knight, you weren't gonna take the crease from Sergei Bobrovsky.
No.
Not until he's done. So
it's a young goaltender with promise that's needed some runway and has had, some personal struggles along the way that's cut into important ice time starts. So he'll get that now. And
we're going to get into that when we get to Chicago here in a bit. The Montreal Canadiens, one of the few teams in the NHL that Meghan stood pat, said, look, we're just trying to get in. We don't know if we're going to, so we're not going to, expend assets to do it. No moves for the Canadiens at the deadline. Sitting 3 points out, does that surprise you a bit?
Well, with all the murmurs around, like Jake Evans, almost said Jake Allen. No, I'm second guessing myself. It's Jake Evans, right? Okay. Yeah. With all the murmurs, I did think maybe they certainly had assets to move if they wanted to get better, but you have to be really careful in that balance, as the Avs have seen, as Carolina has seen. So it's similar to Columbus. I like a team that will embrace the group that they have when they're right on the brink of a race. I think it throws a little bit of confidence behind them. So I don't know. I'm pretty neutral on it for Montreal.
Yeah. And seems like that's how they felt as well. Moving on, New Jersey Devils, a lot of moves around the fringes here. With Jack Hughes getting injured, it felt like that probably would end up being the case. They do add Brian Dumoulin. They also bring in Cody Glass, who scores in his Devils debut. For the most part, Dennis Cholowski. And then you got to go back to last month before they do, before you can find anything else. For you, Daniel Sprong is moved out from New Jersey. Sprong's one of your guys, right?
No, I don't like him.
Oh, really?
It's a locker room cancer.
Who am I thinking of here?
Kidding. That's really dramatic. I liked him as a depth player on Seattle back then, but he's not.
But no, who am I thinking of here? It's a DU guy that you really like. That's another just like depth.
Is it Danton Heinen?
Yes, that's what it is. Sorry.
I cannot believe you just mistook Daniel Sprong for Danton Heinen.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. We're struggling through it. This has been so dramatic between he's a locker room cancer to this mishap here.
Can't compare.
No, New Jersey's in trouble.
Yeah, they are.
I mean, this is devastating news on the Jack Hughes front, but they've got long-term injuries to Dougie Hamilton and Siegenthaler too. So it's kind of dire straits. Like, they had cap space to make moves, and I think they're just processing the Jack Hughes news a little bit and not wanting to completely blow up the team in the face of that.
And I actually think what they did was smart. Just saying, we'll tweak, we'll move some things around the fringes, make a couple AHL moves, but we're not going to get too crazy here. I actually think that was a smart move for them. Moving on, New York Islanders. They send Brock Nelson to the Colorado Avalanche. In return, they get Oliver Shillington, who they then immediately flip to the Anaheim Ducks for future considerations. They also get Cal Ritchie, a first-round pick in 2026, as well as a 2028 third-round pick. The big prize here for me, though, Megan, is Cal Ritchie. Again, you're talking about a first-round pick next year. This is a player who won't, that pick will probably get traded another time before, that player actually makes their way to the NHL. But Cal Ritchie, look, I've talked to a few folks over the last 4 or 5 days who have mixed reviews on what they think about what Cal Ritchie will end up turning into and how quickly he's got the potential to do that. I know you are very high on Cal Ritchie. How do you think the Islanders did at this deadline, you get a nice young player there.
Yeah, because, they would have had to reevaluate an extension for Brock Nelson. And honestly, it sounded like there were talks of that happening and that the Islanders were keen to make that happen. And so they recoup a lot of assets and value in what is going to be a rental for Colorado. I see too a path to the NHL much sooner for Cal Ritchie through Long Island compared to Colorado. So I'm happy for the player. I think they'll certainly get more value out of that than Colorado would have in the immediate. I still think Cal Ritchie would have played a role in the future of the organization one day, but I think he'll play a sooner role in New York.
Well, in the Islanders, we'll see. I think that'll be an interesting fit with Patrick Waugh for Cal Ritchie, because we saw offensively gifted players here had the reins taken off and really able to thrive playing under Patrick Waugh. We'll see if we get that version or if it's the lock it down, slog through the middle, no fun allowed type hockey. We'll see. New York Rangers, they send Ryan Lindgren at 50% retained to the Avs, as well as Jimmy Vesey, Hank Kempf. They get Calvin DeHaan, Juuso Parssinen, a second-round pick and a fourth-round pick in return. Otherwise, they just kind of make some depth moves, as this is another team. The season has just not gone the way they wanted. Brendan Brisson, Carson Soucy, and Eric Brandstrom all end up with the Rangers. Again, Megan, not a lot that we have to say here. There's a team's year just has not gone the way they wanted it to.
No, it's so shocking, though, from where New York has gone in their postseason as of recently, for them to be in this place at this deadline. It feels like too sudden of a crash out.
Yeah.
And I think this starts, with front office decisions moving on from their captain mid-season. I think that a lot of the defensive struggles followed suit, and there just wasn't an answer for it. The morale was down, and there wasn't a good, strong voice in the room or on the coaching side of things to help steady that ship. So it just continued to drown out in the open waters. And it's really shocking to see with the talent that still exists in New York. But it's one of those their losses are gain kinds of things, because the fact that they dismantled as much as they did certainly benefited the Avs in a small way. And yeah, it's hard to feel great about what they did at the deadline, because it was to make up for the other things that they did, what they gave up.
Right. Let's move on here. Ottawa Senators. We talked about the Dylan Cousins deal earlier with the Buffalo Sabres. They add Dylan Cousins as well as Dennis Gilbert and a second-round pick. They also bring in Fabian Zetterlund and Tristan Robbins from the San Jose Sharks. Megan, you and I spoke with someone over the weekend who said, what are the Sharks doing trading Fabian Zetterlund? That's a young player who's talented. That person also told us, I don't know who's making the decisions over there on who stays and who goes, because Fabian Zetterlund's a good player. Now, kind of like what you were just talking about with the Rangers, that mismanagement is the Ottawa Senators' gain.
Yeah, this is a tough one for the San Jose side of things, because on the whole, they lose a great teammate in Nico Sturm. They lose a great player in Zetterlund, who also complemented William Eklund so well, and was obviously really close to him. So you disrupt, it's so important for your young players to have somebody alongside them, because Fabian, he's 25. He's right in that middle range of being able to help guide a young player while still being relatable to them. And that's the thing about San Jose to get excited about, is they do have Will Smith, they have William Eklund, and they have Macklin Celebrini. They've got this young talent to get excited around, but you need players to build around them too. And to dismantle Eklund and Zetterlund just feels detrimental to the young development of a player. Nico Sturm, another one of those depth players with good habits that is such a good role model to his teammates. It's just, I have to imagine this has hurt the chemistry of a locker room already shaken up by the loss of Mackenzie Blackwood earlier in the year. It just felt a little too fragile to move on from a player like Zetterlund, in my opinion, in addition to Sturm. But I think that's why you see Mario Ferraro still in San Jose.
The Ottawa Senators are currently sitting in the second wildcard spot, and their math is looking good, Megan. They have the fewest games played of any of the teams that are around them. They've got a game in hand on Columbus, who they're only 1 point behind. They got 2 games in hand on the Rangers, who are chasing them. Game in hand on the Red Wings, game in hand on the Canadiens, 3 games in hand on the Boston Bruins. So Ottawa, I think they had a nice deadline, a nice couple tidy pieces of business, and they're sitting in a good spot. The two teams from Pennsylvania, we can kind of move quickly through because this was all about rebuilding and getting some assets in. The Philadelphia Flyers will start there. They do flip Andrei Kuzmenko to the LA Kings. They get a 3rd-round pick back. They get Giovanni Smith in exchange for Eric Johnson with Colorado Avalanche. And then they do move on from Scott Laughton to the Toronto Maple Leafs. In return, they get Nikita Grebenkin, 20 and a 2027 first-round pick that is top 10 protected. No real surprises here for the Philadelphia Flyers, right?
No, they get that first-round pick in return for Laughton. I know that was a player that they were clinging to tightly. And I give the Philadelphia front office an A for class because they kept Farabee and Frost together because of a closeness between those players. And they also find a way to make Eric Johnson work because, they don't have interest in Giovanni Smith.
Yeah.
And so it's pretty classy to try and honor their players' wishes while navigating a rebuild. And I have a lot of respect for that. And they don't come up totally empty-handed. They do get that first-round pick for Scott Laughton. So I think that they get a pretty high ranking from me.
And that's a 2027 first-round pick. So there's no guarantees that the Maple Leafs are going to be picking in the late 20s a couple seasons from now. I'm with you. Pittsburgh Penguins, another team that was very busy at the deadline. But again, this was all about getting assets, getting picks, getting young players. They do bring Tommy Novak and Luke Schenn in just to turn around and flip Luke Schenn a couple days later to the Winnipeg Jets. They send Cody Glass out. The big win for me for the Pittsburgh Penguins this trade deadline is they add Connor Timmins in a deal where the Leafs were trying to shed some salary. I think that's a big win for a Pens team where he's going to get a lot of ice time.
Sorry, Danton Heinen also was added to Pittsburgh. So
was he really?
Yeah, earlier. A month ago.
Okay. All right. Sorry.
Huge move for the Pens. No, but additionally, Connor Timmins has kind of been buried in a lack of opportunity. So this is exciting for him to get back on track and hopefully get some regular minutes in games. Because I do think this is a player who his early career was hampered by injury and we haven't gotten to fully see what Timmins can be. I still think that he can help an NHL roster, and it's just been a matter of finding an organization that can find time and minutes for him. And Pittsburgh is a perfect landing spot. I give them an F, though, for not giving Sidney Crosby to the Avs.
Fair. Fair. Yeah, again, this was a team that this deadline kind of went according to plan for them. The Tampa Bay Lightning. This is the team that I point to, Megan, when people start getting upset about picks and prospects and how could you trade that guy. There's probably 31 other NHL teams that would swap the success that they've had in the last 5 years for the success that the Tampa Bay Lightning have had in the last 5 years. And the Lightning just continue to send picks and prospects out the door. This time they bring in Oliver Bjorkstrand, I think a really nice complimentary player, as well as they get Yanni Gourde back in, a player who kind of made his name with the Tampa Bay Lightning. In exchange, they send Mikey Eyssimont, Colorado kid, as well as 2 first-round picks and a second-round pick back to the Seattle Kraken. Tampa Bay Lightning look like they're contenders once again.
Yeah, I really like Yanni Gourde, so that's a great pickup. And I like Eyssimont too. I think he played Tampa Bay hockey, but they had to give up to get. So I think that Yanni Gourde can help more. And it's another team that they're trying to maximize their window. I don't feel so differently from where the Avs are at in terms of giving up quite a bit of draft capital and even, a roster player in Eyssimont, but it's to make them better right now in the immediate because they want to chase a cup this year. And it's bold, it's aggressive, but I think that's how cups get won.
I'm with
Tampa
you.
Bay would know a thing or two about that.
Yep. And 2 Stanley Cups and 3 Stanley Cup finals in the last 5 years. And it's because of a commitment that they've made to push the chips to the middle. And again, it's hard to argue with the results that they've driven through making these types of moves. I'm with you. I think these are players that make them much tougher to play against for sure. Toronto Maple Leafs, and we've already talked about a lot of these deals. They bring in Scott Laughton, they bring in Brandon Carlo, and they do add Reese Johnson as well. They send Connor Timmins and Connor Dewar out. How do you feel about the Maple Leafs? We got to look at them up close a day after all of these roster moves are made. they just still aren't that scary to me, Megan.
Yeah, like Carlo's a huge ad for them, but I thought I liked the on ice product. It was fun. It was entertaining. I'm still not entirely convinced they have the makeup to take it across the finish line in playoff hockey. I think regular season hockey is very different, and they show very well in the regular season, but I'm still not entirely convinced that it's enough to get them over the finish line.
I'm with you. I think the product that we saw on the ice on Saturday was the same product that we've seen from the Toronto Maple Leafs for the last number of years. Fun, exciting, high energy hockey with some outstanding players out there, very skilled. They've been better in that this year. We didn't get to see Tanev in the lineup a couple nights ago, and I think that does help their back end.
Absolutely. It's a little tougher that way,
Right.
Which is good. Toronto needed to get tougher
They
to
needed
play
tougher.
against.
Craig Berube is a different coach. We'll see when they get into the playoffs, but again, I just haven't seen anything that's like, whoa, this feels like it's different for the Leafs. We'll see.
Not in the same way that I looked at Florida and said,
correct,
whoa, that's dangerous.
I completely agree. Last team in the East is maybe the most surprising team in the NHL this season, Megan, the Washington Capitals. They add Anthony Beauvillier and say, hey, look, we've clearly got a mix that is making sense and working here. We're not going to mess with it.
I like Beauvillier, and I've been kind of surprised by what's happened at this point in his career, that I'm hoping still for a resurgence. I mean, I think they have found luck with PLD, and I think they're looking at another player. Like, I think, especially because things are going well, and they went from being the team with the lowest goal share in the league to a team that is getting scoring. And so I think they're also like, Anthony, just be what you've been previously in your career. If you can't assume that position right away, we got you. We're fine. But if you also want to make your way back to that, there's runway here for you to do it.
Yeah. No, I think it made a lot of sense. And I think we saw teams make smart choices at the deadline this year. I think the Washington Capitals understand a lot of what you just said. Like, hey, we've found a little bit of money here. Let's not go spend it all trying, we've got a good thing going. Let's tweak and add a small piece and then keep going from there. Moving on over to the West, and the first two teams that'll be on this list, we don't really have much to talk about. Anaheim Ducks, add Oliver Shillington. That was really it for what I consider to be deadline moves. They've made some moves earlier this season. Oliver Shillington's going to get a chance to play there.
I'm happy about that. I think that this is a player that's missed way too much time playing hockey, like not getting to play hockey. And so Anaheim, it's a clear-cut place for him to get regular minutes, and I think that time will tell if there's still that NHL player left in Shillington that we saw in Calgary previously, and this is the best path forward to finding it out.
Calgary Flames didn't make any moves on what I would consider to be the deadline, but they do have the move of Joel Farabee and Morgan Frost being brought in earlier this season from the Philadelphia Flyers. But this is another team where, again, they're right there on the bubble. It seemed like they didn't want to go overboard.
Sorry, I got distracted because I meant to ask if you felt Anaheim should have moved Gibson.
Oh.
Because of where they're at as a team with Dostal emerging as a pretty ready starter, in my opinion.
I think the Ducks should have moved on from John Gibson. And I think the issue is that it sounds like the price was outrageous. And I think that's where they got to be a little bit more realistic with himself.
Yeah.
Hey, look, John Gibson, I still do think can be a very good goaltender in this league,
agree.
Especially on the right team. But you got to be honest with yourself that you're not even playing him as your own number one.
You don't have as much need for him, though. So don't you want to get something that can help this team rebuild a little quicker?
I would have moved on from him. But hey, look, if the Edmonton Oilers weren't willing to pay the price, I'll put it this way. I would be a little surprised if John Gibson is on the Anaheim Ducks at the start of next year.
Sorry for the delay.
No, you're good.
Back
you're good.
To
good
Calgary.
question. I know, yeah. That was a great conversation because I think that is something that we will talk about as we as this season wraps and we head into the next one.
Yeah.
Joel Farabee, Morgan Frost. Again, there's another team that I think, being realistic with themselves, that was kind of their move. And they said, hey, we're just gonna hang out.
I think those are two big ads too. Like, there was a bit of surprise from the Philadelphia side that they were willing to move on from those players. So credit to Calgary. I think those are two pretty big additions that can help them a lot. I don't know that it completely solves the puzzle that is Calgary, but they came out a better team for it.
No, I agree. Yeah, they're a better team, and it's going to give them a better chance to get in.
Fully.
Chicago Blackhawks, we talked about their deals earlier. They bring Joe Veleno in, but the big one for them, Megan, is Spencer Knight being added in that Seth Jones deal. He's going to get a real chance to be a full-time number one here. You do wonder about a young goaltender like this who is trying to establish themselves in the NHL. We're going to get an up-close look at them tonight. This is a team that there's a lot that needs to be built still.
No, there is, which makes it tough then for a young goaltender. Like, there's going to probably be a lot of shot volume and traffic around the net, and you just might not get the support that you need as a goaltender. So that can lead to goals going in. And hopefully you have the right frame of mind then to not let that defeat your confidence and continue to grow as a goaltender in the face of that, because I think that he can really help Chicago turn the page to a new chapter.
Stabilize.
Yeah, stabilize them. And if they're given just a little bit more of a chance to win on a nightly basis, the morale will go up and the play will improve, especially, in looking at what's happened for Bedard this year. I think that this could be such an important ingredient to helping things get back on track, but it's not to put too much pressure on the shoulders of Spencer Knight, because that can obviously have a negative side effect too. I'm just excited to see him get the regular starts, because I think that's more important than anything for a young goaltender. And I'm curious to see, on the Chicago side, moving on from Jones, this was a player that did help them. I think that people were hard on him because they looked at the money that he made and felt he should be more, and I think that's completely understandable, but it is going to leave a hole in Chicago on the back end too. But this was good business for Chicago because he didn't want to be there anymore. He was getting more and more vocal about it with media, and they get a young goaltender with a lot of promise, a high ceiling, and they get out of that contract. And so I think that is a win-win for both sides. I'm excited to see what Spencer Knight does.
Well, you mentioned the morale, and my brain immediately went to that most recent press conference we saw from Seth Jones in Chicago, where he says we're not getting better. In fact, we're worse than we were at the start of the season. And guys, he didn't say guys don't care, but that was clearly the implication. Yeah, Spencer Knight can go in there and help make them a little bit more competitive. I think that'll help.
And they hold on to Ryan Donato, a guy that was talked about a lot at the deadline. And I think the reason he's kept is because of why we would have wanted him on the Avs. So that's an important veteran presence and leader that can be a part of also helping to stabilize the group. So I think that's a significant decision on behalf of Chicago to keep him there.
The Dallas Stars, what is looking like the most likely first round opponent for the Colorado Avalanche. They bring in Cody Ceci and Mikael Granlund. That did cost them a first-round pick and then a fourth-round pick. And then they turn Logan Stankoven into Mikko Rantanen by attaching 2 first-round picks, 2 third-round picks. Mikko Rantanen already 2 goals and an assist in 2 games for the Dallas Stars. The second goal was an empty net, which they all count the same. This already looks like a much better fit for Mikko Rantanen than it was in Carolina. But his first goal for the Dallas Stars does come off a beautiful feed from Matt Duchene. The Stars got better, Megan. The Stars got a lot better.
Yeah, they did. Do you know what the outlook is for Miro Heiskanen by any chance?
I think there's a chance where the Avs are playing against the Stars against Mikko Rantanen and not Miro Heiskanen in the first round.
And it will be scary if obviously those are 2 players in the lineup together, but I think this had to be done from Dallas's side of things, just with insurance then on the health of Heiskanen as a concern. But you're right, they got better, and they had a role available to Mikko Rantanen that is better suited to what he does best. I think it'll be interesting to see, in the pressures of playoffs, I feel like the intensity of players like McKinnon elevate everyone around them because of how strong that room is. And I'm not saying the Dallas room isn't strong. I do think that losing Pavelski hurts in ways. So I'll be curious to see if the pressure without the leadership group and culture of the Avs locker room around him is perfectly fine for Rantanen, or if that's maybe where there's some concern, because we talked about it on the trade deadline show. Rantanen is an elite player in this league, top 10 player easily, 50 goal scorer, 100-point player. There's no doubt about it, but I still think he serves as a complementary piece to star players. And it's not to say that Dallas is without them. I think Jason Robertson rules. Wyatt Johnston, a young player. Like, there's just the concern of youth, because Nathan MacKinnon told us that he doesn't think you can win with really young players. And I have that worry around the Dallas Stars a little bit.
Well, and I just think that they're in like the start, and I thought this before. This is aside from Mikko Rantanen, and I actually think Mikko Rantanen makes this even more interesting because, like, Tyler Seguin, Jamie Benn, both mid-30s guys in the back nine of their career. Tyler Seguin out right now. Matt Duchene, mid-30s, due for a new deal. And then you've got Jason Robertson, who's 25. And then you've got Roope Hintz and Mikko Rantanen, who are pushing 30. And so they've just got a really weird core of ages that I find just a little interesting to see how this shakes out beyond this season. They're going to have to do some roster gymnastics. Like, they're going for it this year.
Yeah.
The Dallas Stars want to win the Stanley Cup this year. So they've got some roster gymnastics ahead of them as well. With are you going to bring Matt Duchene back? What is he going to want?
There's no way he continues to accept that contract.
These crazy low value deals after having a second very good year in Dallas. So it'll just be interesting. They got $17 million right now on the books for long-term injured reserve. It'll just be interesting to see what they do going forward. But when you look at a healthy version of this lineup, that's a good team. Lines 1 through 4. You like their pairings, and obviously Jake Ottinger and net. This is a team that's going to be dangerous. But like you said, the question will remain, what does Mikko Rantanen look like in those moments? Because look, he is produced at a very, very high level in the playoffs. Without question, You look at the numbers, it's been at a high level. You ask a lot of people who have watched Mikko Rantanen in the last couple of years in the playoffs, and it has not been the level of play that you've wanted. We'll see how that goes in Dallas. And if I don't want to say he was propped up in Colorado, because I think he plays a style of game that lends itself to natural point production, but it's just going to be interesting to see how that one falls.
I think the way I'd word it is he was insulated by like really intense competitors. And I think that Dallas has the talent, but I'm curious about that drive to compete with some of the players. And, it's like the Matt Duchene conversation. When those lights get brighter in the shine of the playoffs, does that get harder? And I mean, he performed last year. So Dallas, like the team that we saw from Dallas last year in the playoffs, was a scary one. Mm-hmm. So it's not to discount what Dallas is. I'm just curious what Mikko is to Dallas in the future.
Yep, I'm with you. Edmonton Oilers. I think this was one of the teams that I expected to do a lot more. It sounds like they were in on the Mikko Rantanen sweepstakes. The report right now is that Mikko Rantanen was willing to sign an extension there, play next to Connor McDavid. But it was kind of the opposite problem. They didn't have the assets to get the deal over the finish line. Instead, they settle for Trent Frederick and Jake Wallman. Choose to do nothing in net, Megan. To me, that is a story I don't really care about Jake Wallman, Trent Frederick, whatever. They choose to do nothing in net after seeing how things went last year, and they had to overcome that and outscore their problems to the Stanley Cup final. It was shocking to me that they chose to just run it back with Calvin Pickard and Stuart Skinner.
Yeah, it's a little concerning because of what we've seen from Stuart Skinner in the past too. Like, that can be a breaking point for the team. And they were handcuffed to the cap. Like, they didn't have a lot of flexibility. So I think that aspect of it is fair, even with Evander Kane on LTIR. But that's where maybe the hard question or hard decisions around, do we need to sacrifice a little bit of one area of the lineup to address goaltending more seriously? Because I don't think, adding around the fringes with like a Trent Frederick really changes the team very much.
No.
But the concern around goaltending is glaring. And if it works, it's great. But it's a high wire act for Edmonton. And I think that defensively, it's still kind of the weaker spot, though it's gotten better through this point.
Their team defense has gotten better, yes.
Though it's gotten better, it's still like the other area of concern. And so alongside goaltending, that would be my biggest concern going into the playoffs. So I kind of understand why they maybe had trouble addressing it aggressively. High wire act. That's what it is for Edmonton.
The LA Kings sounds like they were in on the Mikko Rantanen sweepstakes, but he didn't have much interest in extending in LA, so they moved on. So really the only ad that they end up making is Andrei Kuzmenko. Look, this is a team that's trying to get by the Edmonton Oilers in the first round it looks like we are on a collision course for a fourth straight year of these teams meeting up in the first round. Do you think this is a good enough team to finally break through and get past the Edmonton Oilers?
This is LA we're talking about? Yep. Yeah, another team that wasn't able to do much, though. They were pretty active in terms of scouting games around the deadline. I thought that they were going to be more active. Let me see. What are Darcy Kemper's numbers?
He's having a great year. I believe he's a top 3 goaltender this year in almost every category.
I kind of love to see it then, because that was really the missing piece for LA in the past. It was just goaltending because they were so strong. Otherwise, I'm fine with it.
And I feel like he's maybe Darcy Kemper that is fitting in well behind that system. I'm going to be curious to watch the team as a playoffs.
Yeah, no, I'm excited for LA.
Me too. Minnesota Wild were kind of handcuffed by the salary cap. They are once again up against it. Last year of all the dead cap money of Zach Parise, Ryan Suter, they bring in Gus Nyquist and Justin Brazeau. That's about it. All they could do is add around the fringes. To me, Megan, the big question marks are, when are you getting Kaprizov back?
Right.
And
it's health.
Who are you actually getting back in your lineup? That'll tell the story of what the Wild are able to do here.
Yeah, because if it's a complete Minnesota team, it's dangerous. So they didn't need to do very much. But the unavailability of players throughout this whole year, I can sympathize from what I've seen with the Colorado Avalanche and the rotating cast of characters. Minnesota's going through that and missing some key players. So I understand not doing much, in part because they couldn't. They just have guys out of the lineup that should hopefully be back. So I think Nyquist is a good ad. That was maybe like a depth addition I would have considered for the Avs at one point. So I don't hate it too, that's maybe the one small thing that they do.
They are trying to finish out a season that was probably also a little bit of overachieving for them and get a ticket to the playoffs. The team that they did that deal for Gus Nyquist with was the Nashville Predators. Megan, are you at all surprised? Look, they add a couple picks. Michael Bunting comes in. Are you at all surprised how many of their pieces the Nashville Predators held on to?
I am, because this felt like a team that needs to be more honest about where they're at as a team. They committed a lot of money to older players, and it's taking opportunity away from young players, getting more runway to play and start developing them into real NHL players of the future for that organization. So I can't say I fully understand. I didn't understand it when they did it in the off season, and I don't really understand it now. I do think that they've had a little bit of a turning point from what we'd seen maybe earlier in the year, where there was no goal scoring and players were coming out in media and talking about it, which is extremely concerning. Like with Seth Jones in Chicago, it felt like the vibes were very bad in Nashville. I think there's maybe been a little bit of a rallying cry lately, but I don't think it was enough to do so little when you had leverage to, keep kind of get pieces that will get you by for the meantime, but also start paving the way for young players.
I'm with you. San Jose Sharks, it was a fire sale in San Jose. They move on from Vitek Vanacek, Nico Sturm, Jake Wallman, Luke Cunnin, Fabian Zetterlund, Tristan Robbins, and they get a lot of picks, prospects, things like that in return. Any thoughts on the San Jose Sharks? I told you a couple weeks ago, I think this team has surpassed the Chicago Blackhawks in terms of their rebuild. I'll say it right here. I think Macklin Celebrini is better than Connor Bedard. And I think they had a better deadline. Like, this is what your deadline should look like if you are the San Jose Sharks and Chicago Blackhawks.
I feel like they went a step too far.
Ooh,
if I'm
right.
San Jose, I still think that happiness matters a little bit. And I think they took a really good room that even on the heels of the goaltending trade, which took a hit, right? Mackenzie Blackwood was beloved. They were mourning him when he left. And I think they just parted ways with just like a tiny bit too much that I'll be curious to see the results for San Jose moving forward. Because I think that they had pretty high vibes for a team that is certainly in a rebuild. And a lot of that's the high-flying talent of Macklin, Celebrini, and Smith, and Eklund. And I think that I'll be concerned that they've moved on just a little too much of the locker room.
I think it's fair.
Vibes could suffer a little bit.
You don't want to mess with the vibes. The next two teams in the West, Seattle didn't necessarily stand pat, but they moved two players out. They get picks back. They were sellers. Brandon Tanev out, Daniel Sprong out. They get a 2nd round pick and a 7th round pick. Any thoughts on the Kraken? No. They're kind of just they're in
Buffalo
team.
Territory in ways that they have not retained any depth that they had in the year that we saw them on the title defense year for the Avs, and they've never been the same since. They couldn't keep it, and they've had no plans to retain or like reclaim any of it, and they've suffered at the hands of that decision.
St. Louis Blues, they've pulled themselves back into the race a little bit, so they said, we're hands off. We're going to let the chips fall where they may. No moves for the Blues at the deadline. Utah Hockey Club, kind of the same thing. They take Shea Weber's contract from the Chicago Blackhawks. They also add Victor Soderstrom and Akurati in exchange for a 5th round pick. To me, this is kind of similar vibes to the St. Louis Blues. And really the next team we're going to talk about, the Vancouver Canucks, we're just going to let the chips kind of fall where they do.
Well, and they extend some players that they've been happy with around the deadline. So I actually think of Utah as being kind of this sleeper agent that's going to awaken in the NHL any season now. I'd keep an eye out on Utah. Like, it's not surprising they didn't do very much this year. They didn't need to. I think that they have a lot of pieces in place to be something more dangerous in the years to come. So don't dismantle that.
I am getting tired of picking them as my dark horse to make the playoffs. Every year.
It's all talk until it happens.
Yeah. I pick them as my dark horse every year. Vancouver Canucks ship out Carson Soucy, get a 2025 3rd round pick in return. Again, with the uncertainty around Quinn Hughes, I think this is let's see if we can get in with the group that we've got.
And it's trouble territory because they have to part ways with JT Miller. Their hand is forced in that way. And they had to make a decision around moving Brock Besser or not. And I'm still not entirely sure that that's a player they'll be able to extend at any point, but it sounds like the offers were just insulting. So I'm glad that they didn't just move him for nothing either, but they didn't really get better. And this is a team with clear issues.
I'm with you. Vegas Golden Knights reunited with original misfit Riley Smith. I
love Riley Smith.
It's funny because I think he makes Vegas better, but Vegas is the ultimate example of but you keep having to pay to bring your own players back. I like Riley Smith, and I like his fit with the Golden Knights.
There's a formula for Vegas's success. They understand the importance of depth, and I think it's why like a Seattle, who moved on from depth and didn't try to reclaim it, has suffered. And Vegas, though they have to pay for it, has recognized it's worth paying for at some point because it's too important to their formula for success. It's why a player like Brendan Brisson gets moved out in the process because he wasn't ready to be the depth player they need, because they need a depth player with experience, and that's Riley Smith. So I just think it's exactly what's brought them success in the past. I'm not surprised. I'm curious how long that will be the formula of success for them, though.
Yeah, they're a team that I think Vegas is going to be so interesting to watch. They're the one team that, Megan, I think might be rebuild proof because they've got such aggressive ownership and general and management in a no tax state, in a city that you hear players saying they love to play in a building that's fantastic, outstanding facilities. This might be a team that I will always be curious to see what the Vegas Golden Knights do. I just have a feeling this might be a team that is a little bit, like I said, rebuild proof, that they might just always be competitive.
Yeah.
Not necessarily contenders for the cup every year, but I think they're always going to be competitive and in the playoff mix.
I think they have a good idea what type of player fits their identity, and they find them and they plug them in, and it's a tough identity to play against. To your point, I think that's what helps to keep them competitive.
Rounding out the rest of the West with Winnipeg, they add around the fringes, getting Brandon Tanev, who is the only player from your trade target board that the Avs did not land Meghan. And then they do get Luke Schenn as well to help give them some defensive depth. Look, we've gotten an up-close look at this Winnipeg team a lot over the last year. I think Brandon Tanev, where he started his career with Winnipeg, helps them. And look, you give yourself some insurance with Luke Schenn there on the back end.
Yeah, those are good ads that will help make Winnipeg a stronger team. I think the question around Winnipeg is, are the likes of Connor and Scheifele like the top stars that they need to be to help carry their team? Because I still believe in the goaltending in Hellebuck. I know that the Avs were able to get a path out of the first round because goaltending wasn't to expectation. I am not necessarily counting on that. I just don't know, in the way that Draisaitl and McDavid are to Edmonton and McKinnon and Makar are to Colorado, are Kyle Connor and Mark Scheifele that to Winnipeg?
Right.
And
Team USA healthy scratch Kyle Connor, which to me, that's an indictment on Team USA, not Kyle Connor.
Yeah, I think he was not feeling well.
Oh, so, really?
Yeah,
okay. Right.
And so I think it was well, we don't want, you're not feeling 100%, and we don't want, because you have NHL games to go play in that matter. So let's not push it. I think was the case. But I like a lot of players at Winnipeg, and that's just maybe where the concern is. But these players make them better, and it helps the depth up front and on the back end. So
I do always laugh when we talk about goaltending not being the expectation for the Jets last year, because according to Connor Hellebuck, that was the best hockey he's ever played in his career, and the Avs are just that overwhelming. To me, that is more of a sign of how dominant the Avs became in that series more than anything else. But I just always find that, because the Avs finished that series with a goals for average of over 5.
Yeah.
And Connor Hellebuck was like, I was seeing the puck better than ever. Always just interesting to me. We are going to finish out today recapping the Colorado Avalanche. And again, I will encourage you, we're not going to spend, probably even 10 full minutes talking about this. We've talked a lot about it. We have shows from over the weekend talking about it, as well as an outstanding piece from Meghan that was just published earlier this morning. But we got a chance to see it in action, Meghan. So I want to talk a little bit about, park a few minutes here to wrap up the show, talking about the Avs. I'm going to go through every move that they ended up making. Again, what I consider to be deadline acquisitions. There have been a lot of trades this year, including both goaltenders. But the Avs kicked off their deadline by bringing in Ryan Lindgren at 50% retained, as well as Jimmy Vesey, prospect Hank Kempf. They sent out Calvin DeHaan, Juuso Parssinen, a 2025 second-round pick, and a 2025 fourth-round pick. A few days later, they also had Brock Nelson and William Dufour in exchange for Oliver Shillington, Cal Ritchie, a 2026 first-round pick, a 2028 third-round pick. They also add Charlie Coyle and a 2026 fifth-round pick in exchange for Casey Middlestat, William Zellers, and a 2025 second-round pick. And then to cap everything off, they maybe didn't get the set-and-forget top 4 defenseman they wanted, but they were able to bolster, get that 7th D, bringing back Eric Johnson in exchange for Giovanni Smith. Now, I've read your piece. I know how you ended up grading this. But for the Avs, Meghan, how did they do at the deadline here from your perspective?
Well, if you watch the Toronto-Colorado game, the early returns are kind of scary. I think Colorado put the whole league on notice with the team that they've constructed here. And it goes back to the goaltending trades. This has been an aggressive front office from the jump. And I think it was demanded because this team didn't come together to expectation. There has been injury and absences that have been hard to account for. It's been overwhelming. Goaltending was not to expectation for the Avalanche this year.
Yes, that's 100%
at
true.
the start. And so they have been very aggressive in addressing the team's needs. So this deadline just sort of buttoned up what they could, because they still had to navigate a cap, and it meant giving up a lot too. So there's certainly no ways around the draft capital and some of the prospects that they've given up. Cal Ritchie, obviously projected to be a top 6 center in this league. And Will Zellers, he's tearing it up in the USHL right now among their leading scorers. This is a player that could be a centerman in the future, but might not be, because we've watched so many young players be utilized as centermen their whole careers until they get to the pro level and they're moved to wing. So I just want to caution against that a little bit, that this is a player who's played both through this point, and it's unclear if he would be a part of center depth for the Avs in the future or not. Cal Ritchie certainly was. And so those being players that get moved out, and then picks that are presumably other players sort of in that conversation, in that tier, it definitely hurts the future. So it points to the emphasis of what this team is right now. And this is a team that looks every which way capable of gunning for a Stanley Cup. And it's the goaltending, because Mackenzie Blackwood has been so rock solid for them. That alone feels worthy of investment then in the team that's built around it. But on top of that, it's Nathan MacKinnon and another 100-point season. Cale Makar quietly continuing to lead in the points race, neck and neck with Zach Werenski, going to continue to do so. Taves had some injury at the start of the year, but since he got healthy, he's looked every bit himself again. There's a lot to get excited around with Necas and Drury fitting in as quickly as they have.
Yep.
And I have to feel that coming before these moves influenced them. Seeing Necas fit in so immediately probably gave them confidence that other players like a Brock Nelson and a Charlie Coyle can follow suit, especially with the experience that they have. And what Brock Nelson has been at the NHL level is a bona fide first line center, but also second line center in Colorado. That's an insane 1-2 punch down the middle, but then you go 3-4 now with Coyle and Drury. It's so much more deep than it was. And I didn't think the Avs could get that deep. Where I think they sacrificed is the back end. And it was, though, to get deeper on the forward side of things. And so that feels like the least sexy part of this lineup, but it's hard and almost unfair to say that when you have Cale Makar on your team. That's sort of the price you pay in getting to have a Cale Makar on your team, is you don't get to perfect every area of the lineup maybe quite the way that you'd like. And that's where Lindgren, I described it as unsexy as that is. That is a player who has played a bigger role in New York. And so if he needed to be more in a top 4 role, he could. You probably wouldn't love it, but he could. That's insurance. That's what it is. It's giving you options too that are going to hopefully elevate other players, because I look at the rotation of Malinsky, DeHaan, Middleton. None of those players together inspired any confidence on a third pairing. Now you at least have an option that'll make sense a little bit, right? And Eric Johnson, a player who understands Colorado systems better than anyone, makes the back end a little bit bigger than it was before. Now with Lindgren and Manson there too, 2 heavy physical players, this team got stronger, bigger, a little tougher to play against. You had the scoring punch of Nelson. And I think Charlie Coyle plays a bigger role in all of this than anyone realizes. And that is not only the Val Nichushkin insurance, because he can penalty kill, he can play on wing in a top 6 role if needed, but you hope not. That's break glass in case of emergency. But then there's Ross Colton, a player that we've seen really great things out of. At the start of this year, last season too, I think that he became someone that fits what the Avs want him to be so well. And he just hasn't quite been that lately. I think part of it is trying to get acclimated to that third line role again after getting top 6 opportunity on wing. He thrived on wing when he was there. Charlie Coyle makes his life a little bit easier. I think that they're going to feed off of each other. I think energetically they play a very similar way. And so I think that the forward side of things became more dangerous than people might fully appreciate, that I'm not really thinking about Ryan Lindgren, to be honest with you.
Well, that what you were just describing with Ross Colton, like that, the line that Ross Colton was playing with for a lot of this season was the Avs' second line. The Avs were using that as a second line. So not only does Ross Colton get to slide back down and get on the wing where we've seen him be much more comfortable, but him and Charlie Coyle get to be a third line. And what was the hallmark of that 2022 team? So it felt like the Avs had the best third and fourth lines in the NHL. And that was what ended up truly separating them. Not the high-end talent that we all thought it would. It was the fact that the Avs just came at you in waves, and it felt like there was no reprieve. And I feel like that was what they did here. You know, you and I talked on the show on Friday when they added Charlie Coyle, saying, you had Brock Nelson and Charlie Coyle on your list. You said, yeah, I had that as well. If I'd love it if Brock Nelson, but if you can't get Brock Nelson, get Charlie Coyle. You were saying I did not think they'd add both. For my money, Megan, this is the best 1, 2, 3, 4 down the middle in the NHL. Nathan MacKinnon, Brock Nelson, Charlie Coyle, Jack Drury. Everyone who I just listed there, with the exception of Nathan MacKinnon, got to this team and slotted down a line. Brock Nelson, top line center. He's playing second line. Charlie Coyle, second line center in Boston. He's your 3C. Jack Drury, third line center in Carolina, third line center for a lot of his time in Colorado. You want him to be your fourth line center now. I just think everyone is in a spot where they are able to thrive. And then I think, I'm not going to fully just repeat your point because I think it was spot on. But what you did for the Wings, for Val Nichushkin, you added a player for Val Nichushkin and Brock Nelson. We've already seen some great returns.
Yes.
You add a player for Ross Colton in Charlie Coyle, and we've already seen the returns on that line as well. Charlie Coyle picking up a beautiful assist. It was Jonathan Drouin who finished it, but Ross Colton out there with him as well. Ryan Lindgren, top pairing guy in New York. You're asking him to be a 4-5 here in Colorado. I just think that it was such smart bits of business all over the place. I didn't even mention Jimmy Vesey, who is, I think, a guy that you feel better about as a 13th forward if you need to plug him in. I just think it was nothing but good business all around the board. And you know me, Megan, I view the draft picks and the prospects and stuff like that just a little bit differently. I do agree with the Cal Ritchie sentiment that this was a guy that I think they were going to plug into the lineup sooner rather than later, and he was going to be a guy who was going to be able to have an impact. I always struggle though, because it's like, okay, well, at what point would he have been having a true 2C impact?
Right.
And that's the question mark where you say, okay, we're willing to move on from it to make ourselves better. Now, the picks, all that stuff, couldn't care less. As we talked about earlier in the show with Tampa Bay, this is what you do. You move on from those picks with the idea that, hey, I know we paid a 2026 first round pick for Brock Nelson, but with where we're hoping that pick falls because of the expectations we have, you are talking 5+ years before that player is even getting a real look at making your roster. We are into the 2030 season before that 2026 first round pick. You're really looking at he's knocking on the door to be a difference maker.
Yeah.
That's if everything goes well with that pick. I think I really like what the Avs did at this deadline.
And different teams have opportunities sooner for young players. Like even a Shane Wright in Seattle, it took time for him to even get a 2C job there. And this is a team that's nosediving to the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
So the Avs are not nosediving to the bottom. Cal Ritchie being a 2C would mean a lot of things went well. He beat out a lot of experienced players for that job. And that just doesn't sound very realistic, especially looking at who Jared Bednar is as a coach and what we've seen with Alex Newhook in Colorado. And so I just think the timelines weren't going to match up with Ritchie and this core and this window for it to make as much sense as I would have liked, because I liked Cal Ritchie. But Brock Nelson, he's a difference maker right now. And this team, I'm serious, they can win a Stanley Cup with this team.
I agree. I think this team is right up there with the top, in my opinion, top 3 team that can win a Stanley Cup this season with the moves they made. That's going to do it. We've run long today. Sorry, Chloe. Megan has a piece out, full detailed analysis, breakdown, and grades on each of the Avs moves and their deadline as a whole. So make sure you go check that out, GriddleSports.net. We've got a couple of pods from over the weekend where we are live reacting as things were coming in. We talked to Chris McFarland over the weekend. Plus, we did catch up again today with Brock Nelson. Who else did we chat with this morning? Why am I completely blanking here? Oh, Marty Netris and Ryan Lindgren. Thank you. I knew we chatted with 2 of the new guys. So you can go hear what all they have to say. Marty Netris, no longer one of the new guys, one of the veterans suddenly who's been around for a whole 7 weeks. Much longer tenure than a lot of that locker room right now. So that's going to do it. Check all that stuff out. Griddle Sports on Twitter, on YouTube. If Twitter's back up and running yet, I don't know. She's Meghan Angley. I'm Jesse Montano. Chloe Thiel behind the glass. We got a whole bunch of fun content coming your guys' way post-game tonight. We're not quite done with today yet. Make sure you guys are tuning in. Avs Hawks 7 o'clock tonight at Ball Arena. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll be back at it tonight. Talk to you then. Have a good one, everybody.